So, I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I hope you found a new table, new friends. So we're gonna move into the third major topic of the day, which is the electrification of transportation, arguably one of the great mobility stories of the decade. And to kick us off, Jinhua, who has already been introduced, but let me just say 2 points about Jinhua that you should know. Number one, he is, I'd say, quite an expert in behavioralism. And for me, part of the motivation of being part of all of this is because I feel like it's a discipline within transportation systems that has been grossly ignored. So I think having that contribution is very, very important. And two, Jinhua is the founder of the Transit Lab and has worked with Professor Nigel Wilson and others to really focus on public transportation at MIT, which again, very, very important part of the system with implications for electrification as well. But Jinhua, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us through electrification.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, John. And good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you had a good lunch and re-energized for the afternoon discussion. So electrification, right? As John said, that's maybe the topic today, right? We are kind of all agreed we should electrify, right? And in terms of decarbonization, seems the simple story is let's electrify everything and decarbonize the source of the electricity. And will solve all the problem there, right? So here, of course, in the mobility realm, to decarbonize mobility seems somehow more challenging, right? So today with me, there's Alex Grusin, the CEO of Electricity. There's Professor Don Satterway, Professor of Material Chemistry from MIT, and then three from Zoom. Can we highlight the three panelists, please? Yeah. So one is Matt Stover, the director of Team Edison from Ford Mobility Company, motor company, and Simon Lonsdale, the co-founder and head of strategy for Ampli. And then Andrew Wisnia, the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Climate Policy from US DOT. So thank you all for joining us today to have this conversation, right? So I will start with one question, right? It seems there are many players in this realm, and each player is putting a huge amount of effort in this, both the financial resources, energy, talent, etc. But fundamentally, consumers are not satisfied, right? If today I want to buy an electric vehicle, it seems complicated, right? How do I maintain it? How do I take care of the battery? How do I charge? How do I convince the city to change my, have a charger in there? Somehow, there must be something missing here. There's a gap, right? Between all this investment, the effort, and fundamentally, do consumer feel happy about this? Do we need more plans? Do we need more investment? Do we need more technology, more funding, right? So this panel, hopefully, to address this problem, right? So Alex, we'll start from you, right? Please first of all kind of introduce yourself and also the company, Electricity, and also more broadly, the wireless technology, please.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's great to be back at MIT. Electricity was founded out of the physics department at MIT. And for many years, it's just been a great place to go recruit talent. So I'm excited about the mobility initiative because it's another reason to come back on campus. What we do is wireless power. The invention that happened at MIT was how to move electric power at full power levels, the same as you'd have with a cable or cord, and to move it efficiently at a distance. And what that enables is the wireless charging of electric vehicles. We acquired probably our largest competitor in this space about 2.5 years ago, a company, division of Qualcomm called the Halo business. We acquired that, we merged it. About 1.5 years ago, we ratified through the Society of Automotive Engineers a global standard around our wireless charging technology. We have all the underlying intellectual property. We have over 1,100 patents in the space. And now we are, with a global standard, having our first customers deploy the technology. As you know, in this automotive industry, it takes quite a while to get a new standard set and to get OEMs to deploy. Most recently, Hyundai announced wireless charging on their new Genesis GV60, beautiful new electric vehicle. FAW just announced the start of production for their new Hongqi in China, and of course the Chinese auto market is going forward very quickly. We have another automaker coming at the Beijing Olympics and another one later in 2022. So there's momentum happening. So we've gone from R&D to deployment around the standardized technology. Now, like, why does this matter? Why does wireless charging matter? For me, there's 5 reasons. Like the first and most important is to reach the next wave of EV buyers or just car buyers, and to make them embrace and enjoy having an electric vehicle. We just finished customer research over 1,000 car purchase intenders, and their inclination to buy an EV jumped by 68% when they were introduced to the idea of wireless charging. I mean, what does this mean? It means you just park your car, you walk away, right? You come back to it, it's always full. 90% of the driving people do is within the range of that vehicle. So your whole ownership experience could almost be as if that car had infinite range, because you just never have to charge, right? You never have to take the action of charging. So that's really compelling. Today's EV buyers are, by definition, early adopters. I want us to be able to reach the next wave of consumers. So that's
on that point.
Yeah.
Are you talking about more a fixed place, a pad you charge, or along the road?
Well, I'm going to get there. That's my number 5, actually. So the second one is for commercial vehicles, right, is to expand the charging time that's available by introducing what I call power snacking, right, opportunity charging at the loading dock, at unloading, not just you're taking a vehicle to a place to go charge it in the limited time between shifts, but just building charging into how the vehicle just operates through its business day. You can reduce the peak power needed by expanding the amount of time available for charging with, again, no driver intervention, no union labor required, no cables to drive over, nothing to vandalize or break. There's no moving parts in our technology. The third part is that we can do wireless vehicle to grid. We proved that with Honda 2 years ago, demonstrated it at Consumer Electronics Show. The third is setting the stage for autonomy, all right? Autonomous vehicles need autonomous charging, right? That's us. And in fact, the auto industry has voted. I mean, we set the global standard around our technology. And then the fifth thing is all of these same vehicles, we've set the stage for the future of dynamic charging. So electrified roads, lanes, power lanes, or I think even in a more practical sense, queues. You know, like a taxi queue at an airport or a train station. Perfect application. You cannot do that with cables, but it's very straightforward for us, having installed wireless charging on the vehicles, to enable that lane to charge the vehicle as it moves forward. Again, we've actually already demonstrated that publicly.
Nice.
So I just want to make the whole electrification better than what we had before.
Yeah.
Instead of just trying to, you know, can we get back to internal combustion capabilities? Let's have something better.
Right, nice, thank you so much. Well, one thing we'll touch about, you mentioned standardization quite several times, right? So tell us the complexity here, right? Which part are involved? How do you negotiate? Are we reaching a stage where standardization as a problem is resolved, for example?
Well, I think this is one of the challenges for new technology companies showing up into the auto industry. I mean, I know there are venture investors in the room. Is that it took us 10 years to set a global standard through the SAE. Literally from October 2020, from October 2010 to October 2020. Right. Our team on the ground in China did it in 4 years in China, in the monthly meetings at the China Automotive Technology and Research Center, the China Electricity Council, every month for 4 years, building on the work we had done at the SAE. But the standards are essential because you need interoperability. You know, we want infrastructure providers to come into this business. And they need to know that any vehicle that deploys is going to work on the infrastructure they invest in. So standardization becomes quite important.
Great, thank you. I'll come back to you. So I see now Andrew's here as well. So I just, for the panel, we'll go around this one by one through a few conversation. And then the second round, I'd like to hear from each from you your response to the other panelists. Right, come back to see what do you hear and how do you respond to that. Right. So now let me come to Professor Don Satterwhite. Don, I think you're really the definite voice on battery technology, right? So when we apply this battery technology to vehicles, what do you see as this particular challenge there? You mentioned to me just before that saying there's very different application cases, right? We cannot use the same battery technology for all the things, right? So tell us about that.
Yeah, so if we want to look at the system as a whole, we're talking about electrification, and as Jinhua mentioned in his introduction, we're assuming that the electricity is being generated sustainably. And that probably means wind and solar. And they're intermittent, and we have to be able to address that intermittency. And we need to have storage for that. And we don't have adequate storage capabilities right now. Now, people are using lithium-ion, but let's not forget, lithium-ion battery was invented for this, for handheld devices. It was never intended to go even to vehicles. If you told people in 1992 that you were going to put a 100 kilowatt-hour pack on a car, they would accuse you of irresponsibly deploying the technology. But we're there. So there's room for improvements in energy storage technology. That means new chemistries that allow us to store at grid scale level, but not next to the power generator. We can put the energy storage near the load centers. And the load center might even be the charging point. Because if you have 10 of these cars sitting side by side, I don't care if it's wireless or with cable, and you want to charge a 50 kilowatt hour pack in 15 minutes, that's 200 kilowatts. And you got 3 or 4 of these vehicles. So if you had batteries right there, then you could have the battery being drained to charge another battery, and then you trickle charge back. But again, that technology, my position is lithium-ion is not the right technology. It doesn't have the staying power. You have capacity fade. It's dangerous, fire-prone at large format. And so there's room for invention. And now we have increasingly, what I didn't see as recently as 3 years ago, you open up the press today and you'll see people concerned about lithium. Where's it coming from? Where's the cobalt coming from? Where's the nickel coming from? And what's the remedy proposed? Well, let's onshore cobalt, nickel, lithium. And I'm saying, that's so stupid. Why aren't you inventing a technology, a battery chemistry that's lithium-free, cobalt-free, nickel-free? And therefore, axiomatically, it'll be easy to obtain all of those elements here in North America. But we're not seeing the spending going correctly. And then finally, you have not only the car at the site, but everywhere else, the deployment of technology that can be recycled. The whole question of, if you ask people how they're recycling spent lithium-ion batteries, you'll see the conversation migrate away. They don't want to talk about it. How do you get the lithium out? How do you get the cobalt out? How do you get the nickel back? And so on. So I think there's a splendid room for innovation here. But as someone who's worked in batteries going back to the 1990s, when I told people I was migrating from electrometallurgy to batteries, they looked at me like, what are you doing that for? That's so 19th century. What are you working on this for? It's the Rodney Dangerfield of technology. You don't get any respect, but they just assume. They just assume there's always power in this box, you know? And to make it big and cheap, that's not glam tech. There's no nano here. If someone says nano to me, I say, no, you can't scale that. So it's a really tough challenge. The highest performance requirements with the lowest price point. And you're going into, as was said here, you're going into a deeply conservative, risk-averse industry with a radical innovation. But that's what's ahead of us. But I still think it's an exciting time. I'm really excited about the energy transition, and I'm really glad to be an electrochemist who doesn't work in water.
Thank you, Don. One follow-up question is, you also innovated in this great level storage battery, right? Tell us where this technology is now. Can we power a small village, or can we power, say, a medium-sized city or cloud computing? What is the level of technology at the moment?
So this is an invention here at MIT, the liquid metal battery. We started a company. It's been 10 years. This is not 3 years in instant gratification. It's a long road. We're getting ready to deploy the first product probably next year. And it's going to be at the tens of megawatts, 100 megawatt hour format. And the early adopters will be things like data centers where they want to go green, but they want to have continuous power. But then ultimately, that could go to remote villages and enterprises and so on. But where I want to go next is to get down to the single-family home, which is probably more like 100 kilowatt hours and so on. So that's a different chemistry.
Right. Good. Thanks, Don. Yeah. So now I come to Matt. Matt Stewart, joining us from Ford. He runs as the director of the team Edison there, right? So Matt, tell us about Ford's ambition in this. And as the car maker here, what do you see as the major barriers from consumer point of view for scale up these electric vehicles?
Well, thank you very much for taking the time with us. This is just an incredibly exciting time for the auto industry. I think it was 115, 116 years ago that Henry Ford had his first electric Model T, and ever since then it's been all gas. We do think that in this sort of EV 2.0 reincarnation, we've been at this for about 25 years, and there's an old saying, it often takes longer for something to happen, but when it starts to happen, it happens faster than you think it ever will. And we think that this is one of those times. And I think one of the biggest changes that's occurred this time around and right now is that the auto industry itself is looking at this problem through a lens that it maybe hasn't looked through in the past. In the past, I think that electrified drivetrains were seen as regulation conformance type vehicles. And I think that through the entry of new participants in the market, they've actually changed form factor, changed capability, changed customers' perception of an EV. And as we've seen products introduced into the market that are vehicles that people want instead of vehicles that we think they need, there has been more consumer interest and more aggressive adoption of EVs. And what we see, over the course of the next 5, 10 years is a couple different things. Is number one, when you transition to an EV, we found that 80% of the people that are buying our new Mach-E are new to Ford and are new to EVs. And 75% of those people have said they will never go back. And when you have the conversation with the customer about, why, in some ways, it's almost like the conversation that we had with flip phones to smartphones. The first time you used a flip phone or smartphone rather, you looked at it and you said, oh, geez, this is just a flip phone with a little bit more. And, after about 48 hours, you start to question your original assumptions. And after about 72 hours, you realize that you were totally wrong. And we've seen the same evolution with customers with EVs. As they look at it, they say, well, oh, this is just a new powertrain. And as they transition to the EV, there's a whole wide variety of things that occur to them. Number one is the driving experience is thrilling. There's massive on-demand torque, immediate on-demand torque, and they're fun cars to drive, number one. Number two, just the feeling as a consumer when you get into one of these vehicles, it's quiet and you're moving quickly and it's a calming experience for customers. And then three, the form factor you can create within the car based on the configurations and dimensioning that you can do because of the removal of the engine. It gives you, huge forms of utility. You now have a frunk, you have more internal space, and it can just be a more pleasant experience and form factor for the customer. Additionally, there's an experience that comes along with owning the EV where if you have a charging solution installed in your home, it really can be a super simple, easy experience. There are, as we've looked at our customers and done research on our customers, what we find from the customers is that, they look at this and it's so new to them, they just don't know how to begin to solve the problem. And the idea of charging is, oh, geez, I've got to get someone to install something in my house. Where are these chargers out there? I never leave my house without wondering, ever thinking there's, gas stations not out there for me. Where are all these charging stations? And, as we put together solutions to make this simpler for the customer, it's easier for them to consider that transition. So when we look at the challenge that's facing Ford and the rest of the industry as we think forward towards electrification, the situation, the challenges that we believe we need to address are pretty straightforward. We think we're coming towards the end of the range anxiety concern for consumers, and I think that there have been enough want to have instead of need to have type vehicles that have been introduced into the market that consumers are convinced that they can have a car with reasonable range. Now we have to use technology and scale to deliver that range at a competitive cost. I think the big challenge that we as an industry right now are facing is resolving customers' anxiety relative to charging. The big questions we hear from those customers are, where are they? Are there enough out there? And why can't it be easier to use them? And so we've put together a series of solutions and partnerships to help address those solutions, but we recognize as a company and an industry that we need to apply more capital, resources, and energy against making the charging experience simpler for the customers, because it's really the existential question for them as they consider buying an EV. I think the last two issues that we need to address are these issues of affordability. I think some of that will be addressed through innovation, some of that through scale. It looks like a very long bridge to get over, but I can see even in our own backyard here at Ford, as I look at our financials 3 years ago as it related to our Mustang Mach-E and where we're running it right now, this can be a much better financial proposition than we thought several years ago. The last issue is this issue of energy, the energy infrastructure. And we need to create improved distribution for electrical power. And we need to create new pricing models to make this a more predictable and affordable proposition for those people that are committing capital and for customers who need charging capability where they need it and on their terms. So we think that this is the time for the industry. We don't think that this is a head fake. We think that we are going forward and we're not going to look back. But there are issues that we need to address as an industry and as an ecosystem. Ford is absolutely committed towards moving forward with an EV future. We've committed our icons to this venture. It was not an accident that we electrified the Mustang first, and it's not an accident that the next biggest product is our commercial vehicle mainstay, the Transit. And next year, we will be introducing the F-150 Lightning, which inside the company we see as the second most important vehicle since the Model T. So we look forward to moving forward with all the folks in this room, and looking forward to hearing more from my other panelists. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Matthew. I have a couple of questions. I'll follow up with you in the second round. So now let me turn to Simon Lonsdale, is the co-founder and head of strategy of Ampli, which represents another technology on electrification, right? So Simon, tell us more about what's your motivation for start this company, Ampli, and here, what's the biggest opportunity? You mentioned potential fleet electrification, right? How does fleet electrification differ from a personal vehicle? Are you starting with school buses, ride sharings, or delivery vehicles? So tell us your thought on this.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity, Jinhua and everyone there. Sorry I can't be there in person, but look forward to being part of this group. So to answer the question, we founded Ampli because, as you've heard already, there's been a focus on consumer electrification, but we founded Ampli to really fuel electric fleets. And we do that because of the huge difference that this can make in the race to electrify, and to the benefits that we can bring to both climate change and also to pollution when you start looking at electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles as well as light duty vehicles. We brought about this electrification of fleets and the fueling of fleets in a couple of ways. One, Ampli has an operating system that ensures that the electric fueling happens at the most optimum time. And then secondly, we brought about an innovation called charging as a service to allow fleets to think about and pay for this electric infrastructure and this electric fueling as they use it. And this allows them to very simply look at a $1 per gallon equivalent, so that they compare the price they're paying for diesel or gas today, whether that's $3.50, $4, or even $5 a gallon, to what that would cost in terms of fueling and infrastructure in the electric world. And we can say that for our fleet customers, this is the same or less in every case. And so this charging as a service concept helps to bridge the gap for a fleet as they're looking to electrify and move into this space. So what's different about consumer electrification from commercial or fleet? And it's really that for a fleet, it's all about service. It's about service level, and that every vehicle is fueled up and ready to go at the start of every shift. And then secondly, it's about economics, that this is done for the lowest or the best price of fuel and electricity. So this means that for production scale fleets, for those fleets that have no alternative once they've electrified, which is 20% of transit vehicles or 15 to 30% of delivery vehicles, once you reach production scale electrification, you need resilience, you need service level, and you need uptime guarantees. This fuel, this electricity has to be there on time, every time, in the same way that they're used to having diesel and gas today. So as we look at electrifying these fleets, Jim-Hua, your question was, what do we see as the biggest benefits? So I look at it as, what are the biggest benefits to society of electrification of these fleet types? And as a whole, we know that transportation is probably 30 to 40%, depending on the state, of the total greenhouse gas emissions that we're looking to solve for, to manage climate. So looking across the fleet types where we see great opportunities, school buses, you mentioned, is the first one. And I'm going to quote the next mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, who related the electrification of school buses to cleaner air, less pollution for our children as they're going to and from school. Less pollution means less asthma and less health issues, and that means more time in school and a higher education path. So it's pretty hard to beat that kind of logic in the school bus space to electrify those as fast as possible. Second vertical is really transit. We're already seeing large-scale production of buses and coaches in the transit space, and these have huge benefits because of the number of miles that they drive, and hence the pollution and the greenhouse gases that you're removing. Delivery and pickup, really, thanks to Matt and Ford for all of their efforts in moving forwards to electrify these huge platforms of vehicles that we're seeing out there. The fourth vertical is really heavy duty. And heavy duty people think of as being long haul, but it's not. Really, long haul makes up only about a third of these heavy duty Class 8 trucks. 2/3 of those vehicles are just going around regular routes every day, the same thing, whether it's in a port, whether it's in a distribution center, or whether it's just going from distribution to retail. So there's great opportunity for local pollution. A lot of these medium and heavy duty fleets also operate largely in disadvantaged communities. And so electrification, reduction of pollution really helps in that equity play as well. But the fifth and probably the highest impact is the fleets of light duty vehicles. And we're starting to see that. Everybody's seen the Hertz and Tesla and now Uber deal for 100,000 electric vehicles in the car rental and the ride hail space. And so electrification of these light duty fleets is really important in two fronts, not just for those greenhouse gas climate reductions, but also for visibility and accessibility of these electric vehicles. As Matt rightly pointed out, once people get in electric, they stay in electric. So we're really thrilled to see fleets move forwards in those areas of ride hail and rental as well, probably the most important in the near term. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Simon. You mentioned buses, and both school bus and public bus, right? Here, if you look at the world, 98% of the buses, electric buses, are in China, right? We have, in the United States, the whole country have a couple hundreds. In China, we have about 500,000 or something, right? So there are several order of magnitude differences there. I want to get a thought of what it takes to electrify our transit fleet here.
Sure, it's interesting. There are more than a couple of hundred transit buses in the US, if you know, and surprisingly, there's 5 times as many yellow school buses here in the US as there are transit buses. So they are important to electrify. The great thing is that they're centralized in depots, so it's easy to work with the town. The transit fleets are often part of a municipal town or city. Many utilities in the US, electrical utilities, are also part of that. And so as these transits look to electrify, there is often a very collaborative environment within a city to make this happen for the various reasons. So we're seeing the ability to get large-scale power into these depots. We're seeing the ability to put solar canopies on top and some distributed energy resource to allow for resilience, and move these fleets at production scale to 20, 30, 40, 50+% of their fleet being electric.
Thank you, Simon. Now let me turn to Andrew Wishnia, the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Climate Policy in US DOT. So Andrew, this morning we just celebrated the infrastructure bill being signed yesterday by President Biden. So please tell us specifically in this bill, how much attention paid to this electric vehicle and the charging infrastructure? And also more broadly, what do you see as the government role in electrifying the mobility system here?
Haven't you guys been reading the press clippings? A lot. The answer is a lot. There is a lot for EV charging infrastructure for EVs. Let me take a step back. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thanks for having me on this panel, this distinguished panel. It's such an honor to be with you all. I'm speaking to you at such an auspicious time here at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Such an honor to be here. I've personally been working on this bill for about 5 years, and to get to this point with the leadership of this secretary, this president, this administration, it's truly a remarkable achievement, and I think it will take some time for the provisions to, make sense for the American people and to sort of get into the American conscious, because we have historic not only levels of investment, but programmatic changes that I think are going to make a real lasting, fundamental, and transformative difference in people's lives. That includes our transportation electrification portfolio, including but not limited to up to $7.5 billion for highway charging infrastructure, $5.25 billion to electrify your transit systems, $2.25 billion to electrify our ports and our maritime operations. So I think people sort of colloquially talk about highway charging as sort of the end of the story, but this is really a system of systems story to electrify our transportation system to the broadest extent possible, because this is a necessary component of our decarbonization strategy. On highway charging, we have our work cut out for ourselves. We had our work cut out for ourselves the past several years to get to this moment. But today is the first full day, as you all know, after the bipartisan infrastructure law has been enacted to get to work. And this is not that we haven't been working up to this point. We've been working on technical assistance and in negotiations to get the American Jobs Plan and what became the bipartisan infrastructure deal to the finish line. But now this is, both like the most challenging work and maybe the funnest part of the job is to actually actualize, implement, operationalize these investments. On the electrification side, These are going to be brand new programs. If you think about this as a business, this will be an entirely new business line for the Department of Transportation. There is a small sort of joint program office between the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy. And that joint program office is intended for the Department of Energy to provide subject matter expertise, data analytics, to help states and locals understand where it makes the most sense to install charging infrastructure. But even on the Department of Energy side, on EPA side, this is really going to take a whole of government approach, despite the fact that a lot of this money is domiciled at the Department of Transportation, to strategically connect the entire country. Our goal is not just to install charging infrastructure, but it is to look at charging infrastructure and align it with the vision and values that I think we all want to see in a 21st century national highway system. And that's to create a user experience that is as convenient as possible, as accessible as possible, as reliable as possible, as high performing as possible, and yes, as equitable as possible. And to that latter point, from the president's perspective, Justice 40, if folks haven't heard that term, the essence there is to provide at least 40% of investments to disadvantaged communities. And we want to make sure that as we're looking prospectively, we're not unintentionally widening that chasm between the haves and have-nots. And by the way, I think there's at least two aspects of Justice 40. One is actually where you install charging infrastructure. In some ways, that's the easy part. I think what's even more difficult than that is to make sure on the workforce side that we're looking at Justice 40 from the perspective of who's actually installing the charging infrastructure, who has the technical capabilities to do so, and making sure that we have the necessary and requisite pipeline to make sure that we're really heeding the president's direction there. So we look forward to working with the folks that are listening in today, stakeholders from across the country, like we've been doing over the past days, weeks, months, and even years, so that we deploy a charging network that makes sense, for all Americans. I think that there's going to be a lot of lessons learned along the way. There's frankly going to probably be a number of people that are going to be looking for opportunities to note, where we potentially don't have successes going forward. So we're going to need everyone working together, and we're going to need a diversity of perspective. So look forward to learning from you all and working with my colleagues at the Department of Transportation to ensure an efficient stewardship of taxpayer dollars, both on the formula side and on the grant side, for these transformative investments. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So I have two questions for you. The first one, you mentioned this will be a new business line within US DOT, right? So DOT traditionally organized by mode, highway, transit, port, aviation, et cetera. Do you see a transformation of the organization's structure within US DOT to address the electrification?
Well, I think the business line in and of itself will be transformational, right? I mean, previously, up to yesterday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we had pockets of eligibility. And if we really want to wonk out, within the Federal Aid Highway Program, there was eligibility within the National Highway Performance Program, within the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, within a lot of the apportionments, if you sort of tease those out. But if the choice for a state DOT chief executive officer is to fix a structurally deficient bridge on one side or to install charging infrastructure on the other, to a significant extent, that's not a fair choice for state DOT CEOs to make. So we created new funding streams that are discrete and obvious just for purposes of alternative fuel and electrification explicitly. yeah, I do think that will be transformational, for the American public, for the Department of Transportation. It means that we're going to need a bigger boat too, by the way, at the Department of Transportation.
Right.
We have incredible subject matter expertise, including on my team, but we are going to need more capacity and more expertise to deploy upwards of $100 billion in new discretionary grants, not including dozens and dozens of new programs. Just take the Federal Highway Administration, for instance. The Federal Highway Administration is one modal agency within the U.S. Department of Transportation. And the Federal Highway Administration alone has 24 new programs to administer as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I guess I would have two admonitions, for this group. One, and I think it's a balance. One is that this will take some time. I think we all have to realize and appreciate that this is different than the stimulus and the intent behind, getting money as quickly to market as possible in 2009. This will have a different cadence. But two, at the same time, we can't rest on our laurels. People are depending on us moving these investments efficiently. And by the way, our climate depends on it, right? We have requirements for good reason, pursuant to COP and pursuant to presidential direction, for net zero emissions by 2050 and a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. We can't do so without deploying charging infrastructure. So we're going to do so as swiftly as possible, but do so in a way that makes as much sense too.
Thank you. In terms of the talent, just like many of the company here, MIT will produce talent, right? That's one of the key reasons many people are here for that, right? So the second question I posed both to Matt and Vishnu together. Matt, you also mentioned is affordability, right? Let me press this a little bit. Because for new technology, it rarely consider equity at the beginning, right? As a new technology, you cherry pick the market, hopefully survive, and then later you start to penetrate the rest of the market, right? But today, somehow the society may be a different world today, right? Is it that on day one, we really had to put equity on the front and when we talk about electrification? Matt, let me start from you and back to Andrew for the different perspective here.
That's a great question, and it's a crucial question, right? At our heart, Ford Motor Company makes vehicles for people. We like to sell them to celebrities, but our mission statement is to build vehicles for people. And when we set about thinking through how would we move our strategy forward, there were really two principles behind starting with the Mustang, moving to a Transit, and then moving to the F-150. The first is demonstrating the commitment to an electrified future, and number two, using our brand icons to create new experiences for the customer, to create vehicles that people really want. And then pragmatically, when you look at the Mustang, when you look at the Transit, when you look at the F-150, the revenue ranges on these vehicles is massive. And so within the F-150, as an example, our lowest priced F-150 is $27,000 all the way up to $90,000. And so there's that old adage of what's the future? The future is what wealthy people are doing today. And so in these product lines, we actually have a unique ability to introduce a product at a price point where we can fund the early adopters, find them, and use them to help drive volume, and use that volume to create scale for what is the core of our business. And that's the volume part of the market. And I think when you look at the Mach-E and you look at our pricing in that product category relative to our peers in the market and what that vehicle represents, although after incentives, the vehicle ranges somewhere between 37 and 53. That's a significant revenue price tag, but relative to peers in performance, it's a terrific value. When you look at the Transit, and you look at where we're offering that from a price perspective, you know, it's very, very competitive with our existing gas transit. The F-150, when you look at it from a pricing perspective, is very, very competitive in price range with our existing F-150. And so our intentions are very clear. We are going to be committed to the core of our market. Now, how do we get there from an economic perspective? One, we take advantage of the strength that we have from a pricing perspective in these key brands. And number two, we use that to drive scale. And in that scale, we create the ability to reduce our cost base. And we have to work with a broad ecosystem of partners to create new innovative technologies that allow for us to accelerate that cost reduction. And then we need to look at the vehicle as something more. This is a vehicle sitting right behind me, the F-150, that will have a massive distributed energy resources in it. We're introducing this vehicle with bidirectional power, and although there have been a number of great pilot programs for bidirectional power in the world, in a lot of ways they've been science experiments. This is not a science experiment. This is bidirectional capability at scale. And it can create new sources of value for our customers and also our ecosystem of partners. And that'll allow you to create a different affordability equation, whether it's in the retail or the fleet business, that allows you to actually turn a vehicle which may have been a little bit more expensive, but your gas-powered vehicle couldn't generate income for you in the past.
Right.
This vehicle can when you plug it in. And so there's different ways of looking at the business that can allow us to create affordability for our customers.
Thank you, Matthew. So Andrew, please add from the DOT perspective.
I think it's a really important question that you're asking, and maybe fundamental to your question is, excuse me, I have allergies. Hay fever gets me every year.
Bless.
I think fundamental to your question is on one end, how do you create a sustainable charging infrastructure network that will last beyond the life of these formula dollars and grant dollars? At least I think this is part of your question, right? So how do you create a sustainable network? And on the other hand, how do you create an equitable network? And maybe, you know, to sort of the nub of your question is there is an incremental cost with any new technology, generally speaking. And because that incremental cost, you know, makes it prohibitive for certain segments of the population, you know, should we, at least in some part, forsake or at least, you know, lessen or modify kind of our equitable or environmental justice goals? And I think from our perspective, the answer is absolutely not. You know, environmental justice and equity has got to undergird our investments as part of the bipartisan infrastructure deal, now the bipartisan infrastructure law. And just to take this out of sort of like the 10,000 foot level to just kind of go a step below, I think it's important for folks to realize that we have some really good news. So the $7.5 billion that's going to go out, a large portion of that will go out by formula, meaning that from Arizona and Alaska and Arkansas to you know, Mississippi, Kansas, and along the eastern seaboard, everyone is going to get some funding. And so there is going to be some discretion for where those funds go. But the good news is, for the first time ever, these states aren't going to have to, you know, leverage all of their capital. They're being provided support by the federal government. On the discretionary side as well, we can provide 80%, you know, federal share. And so I think when we talk about equity, it is game changing, you know, to be totally fair to Matt and other folks in the private sector. I think it's game changing when you have a federal investment of this scope and magnitude that can support private investment. And maybe let me end there. This is not just the federal government. We need to do this in partnership and in collaboration with the private sector. And so we're going to need and rely upon, strong consultation, cooperation and collaboration to make these investments work, particularly in disadvantaged communities. But we're going to endeavor to get it done.
Thank you, Andrew. So last, I will pass to Alex, Don, and Simon, each for like 1 minute, your reflection on what you heard in the panel and any final remarks. Before I do that, though, I do want to acknowledge in the audience that there's a group of MIT professor experts on this topic. I'll acknowledge they will be the lead for each of the table here. That's Jim Womack, Professor John Haywood, Jessica Tranzik, Professor Jing Li, David Kiss, Jim Aloisi. So they will be in the table organizing the roundtable discussion right after the panels as well, right? So Alex, I'll pass to you for the remarks.
Sure. In the opening comments, your opening comments this morning, we talked about MIT and the role of system thinking. And I would say that the industry as a whole, this sort of mobility industry, is failing that test when we think about the only solution to adoption of EVs being faster and faster charging. I think there's a lot of innovation happening on the battery front. There's innovation happening on the cables and the chargers. No one's asking the question, where is that power coming from? Mm-hmm. So I think from an equity point of view as well, from the ability to balance the load on the grid, we need to put equal effort, not just into finding more fast chargers, because there will never be enough kilowatts to charge those fast chargers. We need to find ways to help people charge where they park. When they have more time, can charge at a lower rate. It's better for the batteries. It is better for the grid. It makes the number of kilowatt hours we need to distribute to all these new EVs even feasible in the first place. And if the model is we're going to replace the gas pump with fast chargers, it's just never going to work. So I think we're failing on the system level thinking. And the industry is in a arms race to be able to claim I can charge my car faster. But from a practical point of view, I think we're going to be hoping that people still charge at home because it's just not going to be a practical. Wall Street Journal yesterday published that if you charge on the road with fast charging, you're at the same cost of gasoline or more. Mm-hmm. While if you charge where you park, I think we need to reframe it from home to where you park, you can be at a third the cost of the gasoline equivalent. So that's a push, I think, as an industry we need to take on.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, Professor Sadoway.
Well, I'll just continue along this thread. I agree with you completely that the whole business of distribution is critical. And I think when you stop along the expressway and you see, say, 10 cars side by side, each of them with a fuel hose pumping fuel, you think each of those hoses is connected to a refinery? No. And yet we think we're going to connect all of those fast chargers to some generator? That's absurd. We need to be smart about how we deploy storage, and with buffered storage, we can move much more quickly and much more efficiently and achieve the goals that we'd like to achieve. So I'm sorry to be a broken record, but I work in storage, and I choose to work in storage because I think that's the critical missing piece here. Without storage, you can't build out enough generation capacity because the distribution on and on and on, and ultimately to connect to the car either, and I applaud the wireless, but still you have to have that feed. And if the feed isn't there, you're dead.
Thank you, Don. Simon?
Thank you. I'd just like to kind of tie some of these thoughts together. If we want to accelerate the electrification of transportation, there's the consumer and there's the commercial side of it. I'd like to applaud the DOT and Andrew and his team because there's no chicken and egg. We have to have infrastructure to enable that vision of electrification. And infrastructure, once in the ground, is going to last a decade or more. And so it's there not just for this initial generation of vehicles, but for all future ones. Obviously, as we go into this infrastructure, there is the need for distributed energy, and renewable energy is a really important part of this solution. And so I applaud MIT in this panel, and I hope we continue to move this forwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, so last I want to mention, Andrew, you talked about the problem is the system problem, right? Alex, you also emphasized this. At the moment, MIT is actually conducting a study led by Jim Womack, Annie Hudson, John Moenzati, David Kiss, interviewing about 30 to 40 stakeholders in this whole realm, right? We find there's the OEMs, there's charging network, there's utility, there's government at different layers. Quote Jim Womack there, we find we lack a chief engineer in the whole process. Right? Hopefully today we can start the conversation of how do you coordinate and how to make this electrification vision really happen. And in time to really help us to decarbonize the mobility world. Please join me thank the whole panel. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Great. So table discussions, please. And as Jim mentioned, there are a number of great faculty around the tables. And I know we had some table discussion leaders as well. So please try to evenly distribute yourselves as best as possible. And if we have a table with too many discussion leaders, just signal. We'll take care of it.